Everyone doubted it was possible to stand against the ruthless Zorgons and live, except for the fearless humans of the United Earth Fleet, who would make the alien scum regret ever challenging humanity's iron will to survive. Captain Marcus Riker stood on the bridge of the UES Dauntless, staring down the colossal Zorgon battleship Zeraxian on the view screen. The hostile alien vessel loomed before them, weapons charged and aimed to annihilate. Admiral Krasnak's reptilian face sneered as he demanded the humans' withdrawal from the disputed border region. Rightful human space the Zorgons had invaded. Riker's jaw clenched. He would not yield 1 inch of Earth's territory to these monsters. Krasnak would have to blast them out of the stars first. Humanity's survival depended on the Dauntless, holding the line here today against the alien aggressors. Riker gripped the arms of the captain's chair, knuckles white, as klaxons blared collision warnings. This would be their greatest challenge yet, but there was no other choice. "All hands, battle stations," Riker ordered as the Zorgon ship opened fire. The Zeraxian's powerful ion cannons unleashed a relentless barrage on the Dauntless, pummeling the human ship's shields. Riker gripped his chair as the bridge shook violently from each impact. Sparks erupted from overloaded consoles, and crewmen were thrown to the deck. "Shields down to 20%, the tactical officer reported, his voice strained. "We can't take much more of this, Captain." Riker gritted his teeth. As much as it pained him to admit it, they were outmatched. The Zorgon ship's firepower was just too great. At this rate, the Dauntless would be space dust in minutes. "Helmsman, bring us about," Riker ordered. "Maximum thrust, get us out of their weapons range." The Dauntless veered hard to port, its engines flaring brightly as it strained to pull away from the Zeraxian. But the Zorgon ship matched the maneuver, staying right on their tail. Disruptor bolts continued to hammer the Dauntless' weakening shields. "They're gaining on us," the sensor operator warned. "I'm picking up a massive energy surge. They're preparing to fire their main cannon." Riker pounded his fist on the armrest. The Zorgon's particle beam cannon would slice through their shields like tissue paper. There had to be a way out of this, some wild, desperate gambit. His eyes widened as an idea struck him. It was crazy, reckless even. But what other choice did they have? "Lieutenant Sorensen," Riker called out, "warm up the experimental jump drive. Prepare for an emergency jump anywhere but here." Sorensen spun around in his chair, shock etched on his face. "But sir, the drive hasn't been fully tested yet. We have no idea if it will even work, let alone where it will take us." "I'm aware of the risks, Lieutenant," Riker replied grimly. "But it's either that or we all die here. I'm not about to let these Zorgon bastards have the satisfaction. Now, carry out my order." Sorensen hesitated for a split second before nodding. "Yes, sir, powering up jump drive now." As Sorensen worked frantically at his station, Riker turned his attention back to the view screen. The Zeraxian loomed larger than ever, an unstoppable juggernaut bearing down on them. He could practically see the triumphant sneer on Krasnak's face. "Jump drive at 80% and climbing," Sorensen reported, his fingers flying over the console. The ship quaked as another volley of disruptor fire slammed into them. Damage alarms blared, and acrid smoke filled the air. They were out of time. "Jump drive ready in 5, 4, 3. Incoming, Zorgon's firing main gun." A blinding white beam lanced out from the Zeraxian, heading straight for the Dauntless's engines. But at that same instant, reality twisted and warped around the human ship. Space itself seemed to bend and stretch to the breaking point. Then, with a brilliant flash, the Dauntless vanished, the particle beam passing harmlessly through empty space where it had been a nanosecond before. On the Zeraxian's bridge, Admiral Krasnak pounded his fist in rage, his plans for an easy kill thwarted. Light years away in an uncharted sector of space, a spatial rift burst open, spitting out the Dauntless. The once proud ship drifted listlessly, deep rents scorched across its hull, atmosphere venting from a dozen breaches. On the bridge, Riker picked himself up off the deck, coughing on the acrid smoke filling the air. Emergency lights bathed everything in a hellish red glow. He took stock of his crew, relieved to see that there were no serious injuries. They had made it. Against all odds, they had escaped certain destruction at the hands of the Zorgons. But as Riker surveyed the damage reports pouring in, he knew their ordeal was far from over. The Dauntless was crippled, lost in an unknown region of space. They had to find a way to make repairs, to chart a course back to Earth. The Zorgon threat was growing bolder by the day. If humanity had any hope of surviving, they needed to be warned. The fate of their entire species might depend on it. But for now, at least, they were alive. They had lived to fight another day, and as long as he drew breath, Riker swore he would never stop fighting to keep humanity safe from the alien menace, no matter the odds, no matter the cost. The Dauntless drifted through the infinite darkness of space, a battered and broken shell of its former self. Inside, the crew worked tirelessly to bring the crippled ship back to life. They jury-rigged bypasses for fried circuits, sealed hull breaches with emergency foam, and rerouted power from damaged systems. It was a race against time. If they couldn't get life support fully operational soon, they'd all succumb to the cold embrace of the void. In the CIC, Riker pored over star charts with his navigation officer, trying to determine their position. The experimental jump had hurled them clear across the galaxy, far beyond the borders of known space. They were well and truly lost with no clear path back to Earth. "We need to set down somewhere," Riker said, rubbing his bloodshot eyes. "Find a planet with breathable atmosphere and resources we can use to repair the ship." The nav officer nodded, his fingers dancing across the console. "I've got a candidate, sir. 4th planet in a nearby system. Scans show it's habitable, with large deposits of metal ores and organic compounds." "Take us in, Lieutenant, nice and easy." The Dauntless limped into orbit around the planet, its damaged engines straining with the effort. As they descended through the atmosphere, Riker got his first good look at their potential salvation. Rolling green hills and dense forests stretched out below them. Crisscrossed by wide, slow-moving rivers, it looked like a paradise untouched by the ravages of war. But as they drew closer, Riker spotted signs of civilization, primitive villages huddled along the riverbanks, connected by well-worn dirt roads. He frowned, realizing that this world was already inhabited. First contact with a new species was always a delicate matter, fraught with potential dangers. But they had no choice. They needed those resources if they hoped to survive. Riker assembled an away team and took a shuttle down to the surface, touching down on the outskirts of the largest village they'd seen. Almost immediately, they were surrounded by a group of wary-looking aliens brandishing spears and bows. Riker stepped out of the shuttle slowly, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. The aliens were humanoid, but their skin was a mottled green, and their faces were dominated by large almond-shaped eyes. They wore simple tunics, woven from rough fibers, and carried themselves with the air of a people accustomed to hardship. "I am Captain Marcus Riker of the United Earth Fleet," he said, using the shuttle's external speakers to amplify his voice. "We come in peace, seeking your help." There was a tense standoff as the aliens shifted uneasily, unsure what to make of these strange visitors from the sky. Finally, one of them stepped forward, a tall, broad-shouldered male with an ornate headdress of colorful feathers. He spoke in a guttural tongue that the shuttle's translation matrix struggled to decipher. "I am Chief Zalen of the Vax," he said. "Why have you come to our world, Earther?" Riker explained their situation, the battle with the Zorgons, the damage to their ship, their desperate need for resources to make repairs. As he spoke, he could see the fear and mistrust in Zalen's eyes slowly giving way to understanding. "We too know the pain of oppression," the chief said. "For generations my people have lived under the boot of the Cortex, a cruel race that sees us as nothing more than slaves to be worked and discarded. They take our resources, our children, our very lives. We fight back as we can, but they are too strong." Riker's mind raced with possibilities. If the Vax were already fighting against another hostile species, perhaps they could be convinced to join forces against the Zorgons as well. An alliance between their peoples could tip the balance of power in this region of space. "Chief Zallen," he said carefully, "my people are also at war with a great enemy, one that threatens to enslave or destroy every other race they encounter, but we have technology and weapons far beyond what the Cortex possess. If you agree to help us repair our ship and resupply, we can teach you how to fight back against your oppressors. Together, we could free your people and ensure that no one ever threatens your way of life again." Riker could see the wheels turning behind Zallen's eyes as he weighed the offer. Finally, he nodded slowly. "We have long dreamed of throwing off the yoke of Cortex rule," he said. "If you can truly help us achieve this, Earther, then you will have the gratitude and allegiance of the Vax. Come, let us talk more in the Longhouse." Over the next several days, a partnership began to take shape. The Vax helped the Dauntless crew salvage materials to patch the hull and rebuild damaged systems. In return, Riker and his officers trained the aliens in tactics and combat techniques honed in the crucible of war against the Zorgons. The Vax learned quickly, their natural cunning and ferocity making them apt pupils. As trust grew between the two groups, Riker and Zallen spent long hours in the Chief's longhouse, smoking pungent herbs and strategizing for the battles to come. Zallen described the layout of the nearest Cortex outpost, a fortified compound bristling with guards and gun emplacements. "We've tried to assault it before," the Chief said, shaking his head, "but their weapons cut us down before we could even reach the walls." Riker leaned forward, a fierce glint in his eye. "With my people at your side, those walls won't stand a chance. We'll catch them by surprise, strike hard and fast, and be gone before they know what hit them. And when word spreads of what we've done here, the other slave races will rise up as one to cast off their chains." Zallen grinned, baring sharp teeth. "You have the heart of a Vax, Captain. I begin to believe we may yet see a day when the Cortex are nothing but a bad memory." Over the next week, the unlikely allies honed their plan, scouting the Cortex compound and gathering intelligence on its defenses. The crew of the Dauntless worked feverishly to modify Vax weapons with human technology, equipping them with armor-piercing rounds and targeting systems to counter the enemy's superior firepower. Finally, as twin moons rose over the planet's dense jungles, Riker and Zallen led their combined force in a lightning raid on the outpost. The humans' element of surprise proved decisive. Vax warriors swarmed over the walls as the Dauntless crew laid down covering fire, their advanced weapons cutting through Cortex armor like paper. Within minutes, the compound was theirs, the few remaining Cortex survivors rounded up and taken prisoner. As the Vax looted weapons and supplies from the outpost's armory, Riker stood atop the shattered walls, watching his crew work side by side with their new allies. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but it was a start. With the Vax at their side, they could begin to build a coalition against the Zorgons, one world at a time. There was still a long road ahead, and the Dauntless was a long way from home. But for the first time since the disastrous battle that had stranded them here, Riker allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. The Zorgons had underestimated the tenacity of the human spirit, and that mistake would be their downfall. The night before the attack, Riker couldn't sleep. He paced back and forth in his makeshift quarters, going over the plan again and again in his head. Everything had to go perfectly. There was no room for error, not with so many lives on the line. At dawn, the human Vax force moved out, creeping through the dense jungle towards the Cortex stronghold. Riker led the way, a grim determination etched on his face. Beside him, Zallen and his warriors moved with the silent grace of predators, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. As they neared the enemy compound, Riker signaled for the Dauntless to begin its bombardment. The ship's advanced cannons roared to life, raining destruction down on the Cortex defenses. Explosions blossomed across the walls, throwing up plumes of dirt and debris. Alarms blared and Cortex soldiers scrambled to their posts, but it was too late. Riker and Zallen led the charge, bursting through the shattered gates with a fierce battle cry. The Vax warriors surged forward, their new weapons spitting plasma bolts and armor-piercing rounds. The Cortex defenders fought back desperately, but they were outmatched and outgunned. The battle quickly descended into a brutal melee, with humans and Vax fighting side by side against the Cortex. Riker was in the thick of it, his plasma rifle blazing as he cut down enemy soldiers left and right. Beside him, Zalan wielded a vicious warhammer, crushing Cortex skulls with every blow. But the Cortex refused to give in. They fought with the fanatical zeal of true believers, determined to hold their ground to the last. Riker saw several of his Marines go down, their armor pierced by enemy fire. Vax warriors fell too, painting the ground with their blood. Riker knew they had to end this quickly before the casualties mounted too high. He fought his way towards the center of the compound, where he knew the Cortex leader would be holed up. As he neared the command bunker, a hulking figure emerged from the shadows. It was Overlord Zarthok, the brutal ruler of the Cortex. He was a monster of an alien, towering over Riker by several feet. His body was a mass of cybernetic enhancements, bristling with deadly weapons. "Foolish human," Zarthok sneered, his voice a metallic rasp. "You dare to challenge the might of the Cortex? I will crush you like an insect." Riker didn't waste time with words. He leveled his plasma rifle and fired, but Zarthok's energy shielding absorbed the shots. The Overlord lunged forward with blinding speed, his enhanced limbs a blur. Riker barely managed to dodge the first blow, feeling the wind of its passage. They traded blows back and forth, Riker's agility and skill matched against Zarthok's raw strength and advanced technology. It was like fighting a machine, relentless and inexorable. Riker took a glancing hit to the ribs, feeling something crack. Pain flared through his body, but he pushed it aside. He couldn't afford to lose this fight. The fate of the Vax of the entire galaxy hung in the balance. With a roar of defiance, Riker launched himself at Zarthok, tackling the Overlord to the ground. They grappled and rolled, smashing through walls and equipment. Riker managed to get his hands around Zarthok's throat, squeezing with all his might. The Overlord thrashed and bucked, but Riker held on grimly, pouring every ounce of strength into his grip. Finally, with a sickening crunch, Zarthok's neck snapped. The light faded from his cybernetic eyes and he went limp. Riker staggered to his feet, his chest heaving with exertion. Around him the battle was winding down as word of the Overlord's death spread. The Cortex forces, deprived of their leader, fell into disarray, and the human Vax force quickly mopped up the remaining resistance. In the aftermath of the battle, Chief Zalan planted the Vax flag atop the ruined compound, tears streaming down his face as he proclaimed his people's freedom. The surviving Cortex were rounded up and taken prisoner, to be tried for their crimes against the Vax people. Riker limped over to Zalan, clasping the chief's arm in a warrior's grip. "You fought well today, my friend," he said. "The Vax have proven their bravery and their strength." Zalan returned the gesture, his eyes shining with gratitude. "We could not have done it without you, Captain. The Vax owe you a debt we can never repay." Riker shook his head. "There are no debts between friends, Chief. We're in this fight together now." As the Dauntless descended to pick up the victorious ground force, Riker couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. They had struck a blow against tyranny today and forged an alliance that would be remembered for generations. But even as he savored the victory, his thoughts turned to the greater challenges ahead. The Zorgons were still out there, growing stronger every day. Earth needed to be warned, and the fight for survival was far from over. Riker gathered his crew and made his way to the Dauntless's bridge, his steps heavy with weariness but his spirit unbowed. "It's a long road home," he told Sorensen as he collapsed into the command chair, "but we've got a warning to deliver. Set course for Earth, best possible speed." The Dauntless rose from the planet's surface, its engines flaring brightly against the stars. On the ground below, the Vax cheered and waved, their voices carrying across the distance. Riker watched the planet recede on the view screen, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, what dangers they would face on the long journey back to human space, but he knew one thing for certain. As long as he had his crew, his ship, and his newfound allies at his side, he would never stop fighting for the survival of his people. And may the Zorgans tremble in fear when they learned the name of Marcus Riker and the crew of the Dauntless. The Dauntless dropped out of warp space near Earth, its hull still bearing the scars of their battle with the Zorgans and the marks of their long journey home. Riker stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the view screen as the blue-green world grew larger before them. It had been months since they had last seen their homeworld, and the sight of it filled him with a sense of purpose and determination. As soon as they entered orbit, Riker was on the comm with United Earth Command, requesting an immediate audience with the Council. He had vital intelligence on the Zorgon threat, information that could mean the difference between humanity's survival and extinction. The Council chambers were in chaos when Riker strode in, flanked by his senior officers. Representatives from every corner of Earth were shouting over each other, their faces etched with fear and confusion. Riker pushed his way to the center of the room, his voice cutting through the din like a knife. "Councillors, I come before you with grave news," he began, his tone somber and urgent. "The Zorgons are coming. Their fleet is vast, their weapons powerful, and they will not stop until humanity is either enslaved or destroyed." The chamber erupted into a fresh wave of panic and outrage, with some councillors demanding proof of Riker's claims, while others called for immediate military action. Riker held up his hands for silence, his eyes blazing with intensity. "I have seen the Zorgans' cruelty firsthand," he continued, his voice rising with emotion. "I have watched them slaughter innocent civilizations, burn worlds to ash and enslave entire species. We cannot hope to reason or negotiate with such monsters. Our only chance is to fight, to stand together as one people against this threat." Some of the councillors remained unconvinced, arguing that diplomacy should be given a chance before resorting to violence. They called for attempts to open a dialogue with the Zorgans, to find a peaceful solution that would avoid the loss of human lives. Riker slammed his fist on the podium, his frustration boiling over. "You don't understand," he shouted, his voice echoing through the chamber. "The Zorgans see diplomacy as weakness, any attempt at negotiation as an invitation to conquer. They will not stop until Earth is a smoking ruin and humanity is broken and enslaved. We must act now before it's too late." The debate raged on, with Riker and his supporters growing more impassioned, and the opposition becoming more entrenched in their positions. The captain could feel precious time slipping away, time they couldn't afford to waste while the Zorgons closed in on Earth. Suddenly alarms began to blare throughout the chamber, emergency lights flashing red and warning klaxons sounding. The councillors fell silent, their faces draining of color as they realized what was happening. "Zorgan ships detected at the outer perimeter," a voice crackled over the comm. "They're launching fighters and assault craft. Defenses are scrambling to respond." Riker turned to the council, his expression grim and determined. "It's begun," he said simply. "The Zorgans are here, and they won't stop until Earth falls. We need to—" His words were drowned out by a deafening explosion that shook the building to its foundations. The councillors screamed and dove for cover as chunks of debris rained down from the ceiling. Emergency force fields snapped into place, sealing the breach, but the damage was done. Riker picked himself up off the floor, his ears ringing and his vision blurry. He could taste blood in his mouth and feel the sting of cuts on his face, but he ignored the pain. Earth was under attack, and he had a job to do. "Get me a status report now," he barked into his comm, his voice hoarse with smoke and urgency. "What's the situation with our defenses?" The reply was grim. Zorgon ships were pouring into Earth's atmosphere, raining down destruction on the planet's cities and defensive installations. The Earth Defense Fleet was outmatched and outgunned, taking heavy losses as they tried desperately to hold the line. Riker turned to the councillors, who were huddled in small groups, their faces etched with fear and despair. "I need every ship, every weapon, and every able-bodied person you can muster," he told them, his voice hard and unyielding. "This is no longer a debate. Earth is under attack, and we need to act now if we hope to survive." To their credit, the councillors responded quickly, setting aside their differences in the face of the common threat. Emergency orders were issued, calling up reserve units and activating every ship and weapon in Earth's arsenal. Riker took command of the defense fleet, knowing that he was the best chance they had of holding off the Zorgons. As he strode through the shattered streets of the city, making his way to the spaceport and his waiting ship, Riker couldn't help but feel a sense of dread and despair. The Zorgons were a formidable enemy, and Earth's defenses were woefully unprepared for the scale of the attack they now faced. Everywhere he looked, he saw destruction and chaos, with civilians fleeing in terror and buildings collapsing in flames. But he also saw something else, something that gave him a glimmer of hope in the darkness. He saw humans coming together, setting aside their differences and their fears to stand as one against the invaders. He saw soldiers and civilians alike taking up arms, ready to fight and die for their world and their people. And as he took his place on the bridge of the Dauntless once more, Riker felt a fierce determination burning in his chest. He would not let Earth fall, not while he still drew breath. He would fight with everything he had, rally every ship and every soldier, and stand against the Zorgon tide until the very end. "All ships, this is Captain Riker," he said, his voice steady and unwavering over the comm. "The enemy is at our doorstep, and the fate of humanity hangs in the balance. But we will not go quietly into the night. We will not vanish without a fight. We're going to live on, we're going to survive. Today we celebrate our Independence Day." A cheer went up from the crew of the Dauntless and the other ships of the fleet, a defiant roar that echoed across the void. And as the Zorgon ships bore down on them, their weapons blazing with destructive energy, Riker gave the order to engage, leading the charge against the invaders. The battle was joined, the fate of Earth and all humanity hanging in the balance. The Zorgon ships were massive, their hulls bristling with advanced weaponry that tore through Earth's defenses like tissue paper. The human fleet fought back with everything they had, their ships darting and weaving through the enemy formations, trying to find weaknesses and exploit them. But for every Zorgon ship they destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place, pouring out of the jump points like a never-ending tide of destruction. The Earth defense fleet was being pushed back, their losses mounting with every passing minute. Riker gritted his teeth as the Dauntless shook around him, the ship's shields straining under the onslaught of Zorgon fire. He could see the other ships of the fleet struggling, their hulls breached and venting atmosphere, their crews fighting desperately to keep them in the fight. "We need to hold the line," he shouted over the chaos of the bridge. "We can't let them through, no matter the cost." But even as he said the words, he knew they were losing. The Zorgons were too strong, their ships too advanced. It was only a matter of time before Earth's defenses crumbled and the planet fell. Suddenly, a new voice crackled over the comm, the signal weak and distorted but still recognizable. "Captain Riker, this is Chief Zalen of the Vax. We have received your distress call and are en route to assist. Hold fast, my friend. Help is on the way." Riker felt a surge of hope and relief flood through him at the sound of Zalen's voice. The Vax were coming, with a fleet of their own ships and warriors ready to join the fight against the Zorgons. They were still outnumbered and outgunned, but with the Vax at their side, they had a chance. "All ships, this is Captain Riker," he said, his voice ringing out over the comm. "Reinforcements are inbound. The Vax are coming to join the fight. We just need to hold on a little longer. Give it everything you've got, and don't let those bastards through." A fresh cheer went up from the human fleet, a renewed sense of determination and resolve filling the hearts of every soldier and crew member. They fought with a newfound ferocity, throwing themselves into the battle with reckless abandon. And then, just when all seemed lost, a new wave of ships dropped out of warp space, their hulls emblazoned with the markings of the Vax. They slammed into the Zorgon fleet like a hammer, their weapons tearing through the enemy ships with devastating precision. Riker watched in awe as the Vax ships joined the fight, their warriors pouring out onto the battlefield in a fierce and primal roar. The tide was turning, the Zorgons falling back under the combined might of the human and Vax forces. But even as victory seemed within reach, Riker knew that the battle was far from over. The Zorgons were still a formidable enemy, and they would not give up easily. He steeled himself for the long fight ahead, knowing that the fate of Earth and all humanity rested on their shoulders. "All ships, form up on me," he ordered, his voice steady and resolute. "We're going to push these bastards back to whatever hellhole they crawled out of. We're going to show them what happens when you mess with humanity. Let's finish this." And with that, the Dauntless surged forward, leading the charge against the Zorgon fleet. The battle raged on, the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance, but with the Vax at their side and the spirit of humanity burning bright, Riker knew that they would not fail. They would fight to the last, and they would prevail no matter the cost. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support me, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel. And for every comment that says, "I liked the story," I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.